Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first item on the work session is the Fairgrounds Park Entrance Building and Gatekeeper's House. Rodney?
Good afternoon. With me is Doug Reed. He's a board member at Maryland Historic Trust. I asked him to join me to hopefully facilitate this discussion. I think everybody knows the long-term history of this building. I'm not going to get into all that, but you certainly can ask me questions about that if you have any. Let me just talk more about the recent history, like in the last few months. Well, about a year ago, we applied for a grant to help re-mothball the building. It was originally done back in 2002. We applied for a grant for the Maryland Historic Trust, and we were fortunate to get that. It was awarded about 7 months ago, so we basically have to decide, are we going to accept this grant or not? And that's part of this discussion for this evening. At the last time I came here to talk to you all about this, we discussed what could be done with the building. Could the building be modified in any way? So I tried to get those questions answered by the Historic Trust. And the bottom line really of that whole discussion is that the construction, the redoing of the building can't destroy any of the historic materials in any way, and what they regulate is the exterior of the building. So you can do whatever you want inside, but if you put a vent through the roof, they have to approve it and review it, and that's just the way it is. That easement is on the building. It's been on the building since 2002, and basically when we accepted grants back in 2002, we basically committed to the long-term care of this building. So I don't have many legal, emphasis on the legal options for you, other than the suggested path that we take in the memo. And that is that we go ahead and accept the grant, that we add our $75,000 in matching funds to that, and we work at mothballing the building and addressing some of the biggest issues, particularly the roof and the wall where the gatekeeper house and the entrance building come together. That wall, as some of you saw when we were out there, is in really bad shape. The siding repairs, painting both the structures, and just doing some other repairs to the windows and things like that. That would get the building stabilized again, and it would not be seeing the continued deterioration that it's having right now. Then we would need to pull together, phase two would be to pull together all the information we have on the building and have a assessment done of the building and what it would take to make it structurally sound to meet the current building codes, because I think it was built in 1911 or something like that, and there really were no building codes. So that assessment would have to be done. And then we package that all together and put out a request for proposals for developers to potentially work on the building and redevelop it. Doug can provide you some insight on some of the projects that they've done like that in the past. If a developer doesn't come along, the worst thing would be is that the building is stabilized and it's probably good for another 20 years, and then we'll probably be doing this again. But that's kind of where we're at. So with that, I'll turn it over to Doug, and he can offer what he'd like to say.
Well, thank you. First, I'd like to applaud the city and the mayor and council, your group, as well as previous groups, for the beautiful job you've done in turning the racetrack and the old fairgrounds into the fairground park. I had never really been back there except at night during the July 4th fireworks to see it. And because of our discussions that we've had with Rodney and Jill Thompson and you, I went back there one day to see if it wouldn't work for some project I was thinking about. I was really pleased to see the commitment that the city has made to that park. Now, as part of that park, the most significant part of it is this fairground entrance building. And I feel your pain. I know that you think it is a white elephant to you. But think of it this way. One, you have a member back here who said down in the hall that if this building was 2 blocks closer to the Maryland Theater, you'd probably be jumping all over it to save it somehow. It was right there by the park. It is the gem, the crown jewel stone of that park. And it could be an entrance again. Now, I don't know how many of you grew up in Hagerstown, but I remember in the early 50s walking through those gates all the way up through 62, 64, when we would go through those gates and go in there. And it was a wonderful experience to see the Hagerstown Fair. It's no longer there. But before I get into this little piece of it, I have been talking to any member of the public, especially local citizens in the county, here in Hagerstown. My wife and I go out once or twice a week, and we get with other people, and I ask them, do you go to Hershey, Wolf Trap, Meriwether Post, all of those venues 60, 70 miles away? Would you go to the Hagerstown Fairgrounds Park and see a show there? Oh, yes. I said, well, how much would we, well, we pay up to $80, $60, $80, $100 a show. I happened to have a discussion with Miss Green, who is your director down here at the Maryland Theater. Now, this is no commitment on their part, but she has offered to, and I think she's already talked to the city once before this all started up, about sharing the idea of putting events on out there. If you're going to do something like that, you have to have limited access so that you can control the entrance into the park. There's your building. That's one of its uses, and it's an original use. The other thing I can tell you that I had the Maryland Trust do a little bit of research. This is the only building like it on the East Coast. It is the only entrance building of that design on the East Coast. They think west or east of the Mississippi. They're not sure about that part. Now, I don't know, how many of you drive west and go through the elevated interstate through Cumberland, Maryland? Everybody here? Mm-hmm. You know that long 200-foot building on the, it would be the southwest side. It used to be called the Jehoka Building. It has that clay tile roof. Well, that is the Footer Dye Works building. It was built just about the exact same year as what we have out here. And we had way worse problems with that building. I was on the board of Canal Place, and I did not realize when Rodney sent me up there to be on that board that I'd wind up having to ramshot that building to keep it from being torn down.
Rodney Little with you.
Rodney Little, who was the former director of the Maryland Trust. So I got ramshotted into that one. But we had bricks falling off the building, glass falling out of the windows. We had rotten walkways on either side of the building, 4 stories up. Nobody could walk near that building, and everybody was up in arms to get that building torn down. There was real justification there. And I said, well, it's on the National Register, and I was told it was not. I was shocked. So I got the board together, I told them what the story was, and they backed it all the way. We got it on the National Register. Paula Reed, sitting right here, got it on the National Register for us. We had a very dedicated staff member who knew where to find those little bits of money we needed. Our part was to prepare the building, get it looking good, get it stabilized, get all the hazardous materials out of the building, and get all the guesswork out of the building, that we could have a very thick package of information, up to date, engineer studied, all the paperwork saying it's free of hazardous materials, in the hands of a developer. We had 19 initial people come forward. We had 2 really solid bids, and we chose our bidder to be Mike Joy, who came up there, and he needed money. And it was his project to do. And his budget was $7.5 million, and we gave him 1 year free of competition to analyze the building and see if he could do it financially. One of the things I have here, if you want to see it, it is a letter from the state delegation up there that said no more government money is going into that building. We're done with it. Just about where you are today, you would like to be there. But there was no easement on that building, except that the state owned it. So what happened, he finished his analysis, and he came back and he said, I can't do it. And we said, why? And he said, I need $1.25 million extra to make it if economically feasible, so I put together the package. The state is the one who allowed it to run into poor condition that it was in, and they gave them the $1.25 million. Now, I know this isn't anywhere near the kind of money that we're talking there. That was a $7.5 million project that's 100% rented now. Very, very, 4 stories, 45 feet wide, 200 feet long. It has high rent, premium apartments in the upper 3 floors. A brewery came into it. He's got a restaurant going into it. It's just an amazing turnaround. And now, everybody's in favor of it. For this building out here, a similar thing needs to happen. You have an easement on the building, and Charlotte Lake visited us on October 22nd. We had, the 2 ladies here were there, and she made it very clear. She was from the Maryland Trust. She is the easement person, and she told us that you have a perpetual easement, which is law now. You took money from the taxpayers of Maryland, and in return for that money, you said, we'll take care of the building. We'll find a use for it. Now, taking care of it once over 20 years is not exactly what they wanted you to do. They would like you to fix the little holes before they become big holes in the roof and big problems happen. And it's going to be cheaper for everybody if you just maintain the building. Now, a building that's used is far easier to maintain and far less deterioration, far less vandal problems and everything else if we can get somebody in there. I would encourage you first to be your own developer. You own the building. It's right there by the park. I am positive that with a little bit of effort, if you need to get your engineer out there, and I know you typically use somebody here in the county who's qualified. He's the only one qualified to look at that building. If you look at engineer qualifications, once they have that stamp that says they can go look at any building, they shouldn't be allowed to do that any more than a new house developer should ever work on an old house. I worked in old houses, and I shouldn't be allowed to build a new house because I don't know the new house code. It's different. So you need to find, put out an RFP to pre-qualify engineers to look at that building unless you have a contract with this one engineer. You need to get somebody who has old building experience and let them go in there, because the new building guy is going to come in and say, oh, well, it's no good. That building is way good. It has lots of good bones in there. And you bet we saw some rotten in there because the holes were not fixed. But that's still, it's a very structural building. It's going to need to be upgraded, and there was a lot of chatter about it doesn't have any plumbing, electric, or anything. As a contractor, that's great. You don't have to take out the old to put in the new. You just put in the new. It saves money, and you're not crowded with all of that stuff. So you get an engineer in there. He looks it over. He says, this is a problem, this is a problem, and this is a problem, and he proposes the repairs for those problems. You pay for that, and you give it to the developer, but the developer doesn't have a guess in it anymore. The less guesswork the developer has to do, the more proposals you're going to get. Secondly, take the grant, take the money that you budgeted, and fix the outside of that building. Keep it in good shape. It'll look better for any developer who's coming by. Now, I already had one developer drive by. Unfortunately, he didn't see the possibility of it paying back his investment as housing. And I don't think we need housing. I think we need for it to be maintained partly as a venue entrance, but mostly you could adapt a great deal of that building. That building's 10 to 11,000 square feet. I did a quick calculation, came up with about 11,000 square feet. There's a lot of space in that building. And we have the opportunity. One of the things we talked about briefly was putting a shop in there. There are lots of woodworkers, but they don't have the space in their homes, they don't have the place in their homes for a wood shop. Down in Frederick, for years, and I used to take advantage of this when I lived up in Thurmont for a short period of time, they had a shop where you could go down and you pay $30 a night or whatever it is. They had a fee attached with it. They had an instructor there who was the supervisor of the shop, who would teach you how to use the machines, and you could build projects there. That's something that building would accommodate on the lower floor, not in the residence. That residence needs to be gutted out and done something else with. The other thing, on the second floor, that's one big wide open space up there. And given that it's gonna need to be upgraded in terms of the floor structure to hold it, there's an event center, a conference center, a small conference center. You don't have that downtown. And you do have the potential for parking. One of your members sitting here was talking about doing an amphitheater out the back there, but you've got so many particular types of potential for entertainment out there, it's not even funny. That could be parking as well. Now, Rodney gave me an update, and he gave me an overview plan of the site. You have a lot of parking out there. Well, let's just say you said, oh, we could put 10,000 people standing out in the grass like they do in the old stadium in Hershey. They get up to 10,000 people. That people like Phil Collins come up there, and all they do is stand or sit in the grass, period. No seats, nothing. You could turn that around and put people up there in the old grandstands and build the stage in the ball field. This is no damage to the ball field. It doesn't mean that you have to put a lot of money into any kind of infrastructure except for limiting access. That's the only thing you have to do to the grounds, and then let them come through the gatehouse. You would make so much money, so much money, it's not even funny. And you could easily pay for that building. And then you could have someone staffed out there to make those arrangements, working in consortium with the Maryland Theater, if that's your desire. And then you would have the potential of a catered something or other up there on the second floor. That is an event center waiting to happen. And it's a very nice space, big, wide open space, lots of exiting requirements, and you can do that without hurting the history of that building. Mike, oh, I apologize. Shut this thing down. My suggestion to you is to go ahead and take your grant money, put together your program to clean it up, get it looking good. And while you're doing that, solicit your engineer, solicit a marketing engineer, someone who comes in and surveys the area to see if you could do an event center there, and see if you can handle that. This is a great building. Don't lose it. Pardon me. I think, how many people here are for the fairgrounds? I'm sorry.
I get you a
I
water?
need something.
Okay. You got it, Ronnie? Yes.
You have a lot of people who are interested in this building. I think I'm pretty much done.
So I have a question on the grant. It's a $60,000 grant, $75,000 from the city. And I was unclear as to the stipulations. There was a difference between Exhibit A and some text in here. The text outside of Exhibit A kind of led me to believe that we're under no time limit as to, we don't have to take that 60,000 and come up with the 75,000 right away. It can be used to do repairs over a period of time.
Right, I don't think it has to be done immediately, but I think they do have a
There's a
period of time of
two-year, in Exhibit A was the time limit
Yeah,
to
that's pretty typical
utilize
for
it.
grants. And the immediate problem is they awarded it to us back in July, and we haven't told them if we were gonna take it yet. So that's the first question. If we're gonna not do that, then we need to decide that. If we're gonna do it, then I need to get you to pass a resolution. We'll accept the grant and go from there. But then we have about 2 years to make
2
it.
years to,
Yeah.
I
When
do
we
want you
secured the
to,
funds in 2002, just for clarification, that was to stabilize the structure.
Yeah, basically the same thing we're
It
doing
was
now.
not to put it back into reuse, it was to stabilize the structure. We were not obligated to find an end user through that process.
I mean, I think that's what their desire was, but we weren't obligated to do that.
They are concerned that you have not said you're gonna take the grant, that, they're not gonna hold that open forever.
We did not fail to meet any obligation of the requirements of the 2002 grant provision.
You could argue that we haven't maintained it in a mothballed state. I think they would say that.
Because of the leaks in the roof and
Right.
the damage.
It's just overwhelming for our staff to be able to do that.
So Doug, you feel that MHT would not allow, because of the perpetual easement, MHT would not allow the city of Hagerstown to keep three sides of this facility, tear away the back, and gut it out, and use that as an amphitheater that would be able to hold musical venues, but still retain three sides of the structure in a historical fashion.
That is pejoratively called a facotomy, and they are not interested in that. Now, I did ask the Maryland Trust for clarification on that, and I understand you received the letter, but I didn't get a
Yeah,
copy of it.
They said no.
They said that, yeah. that's all.
So, no, I'm sorry. I would support you if we could do that. But it isn't gonna save you money. You got a building behind it, you gotta take down this building, you gotta put another one up. You still have the front to deal with. That's not a way to save money.
Well, don't get me wrong, I mean, your wolf trap scenario is not new, in this
think it
council
was.
chamber.
No, but that is not, that wouldn't meet the requirements of people to make it any different than the Maryland Theater or some of the other amphitheaters, small amphitheaters that we have now. When we proposed that idea, it was to draw in a much larger artist than what a 1,200 seat capacity place could do. So that, as far as what Shelley and I were interested in doing, would not meet the requirements. It's just not big enough. There wouldn't be enough seats to, it would be in direct
No, I don't
competition with the
think it
Maryland
would.
Theater, which would be,
No one's proposing putting it in the building. The building's not
right,
big
on the
enough.
the outside.
You can
yeah.
get thousands of people in those ball diamonds.
I
Thousands.
think he's talking about using the softball and soccer
Yeah.
fields.
Right,
for
he's
it.
talking about grandstands as a place to have, and again, not a new concept.
No, I'm sure it is.
But one that takes years and millions to plan and to put it in.
I would agree with you,
Come to
except
fruition.
you've already got the facility. We're talking,
Grandstands need some,
The
I know,
grandstands.
but I'm not talking about
Including
putting
a
the
roof.
people in the grandstand.
okay. That's what the mayor was talking about, I think.
Yeah.
Mayor, I just have a comment, an observation. It's the same observation I make twice a year with you when we go to the Memorial Day and the Veterans Day functions. The one thing that those functions seem to have in common with this is a bunch of us old folks. Seriously, when I look at the Historic Society, when I look at the people who show up for the Veterans Day ceremonies, unfortunately, I find people our age. And I don't find a lot of 20, 30, and 40-year-olds. And I wonder where all of our history is going to go in the future. I think it was a 3-2 vote to accept this back in the beginning when we did it. And I'm happy to say I was one of the 3 votes. Had we not accepted it, I have no doubt whatsoever it wouldn't exist now. I also have the same memories that you do, Doug, but it puts fear in me about the younger generation that doesn't have those memories and don't seem to be a whole lot interested in having them and retaining them. But I'm all for it. I was then and I am now. I knew then it was gonna cost money. I know now it's gonna cost money. But those are decisions people have to make. Fortunately, it makes it rather easy for this council because they don't have much of a choice. So the 3 of us who decided back then made a decision that it's gonna last as long as the Maryland Historic Trust says it's gonna last, I guess.
May I say something? I agree with you wholeheartedly. It appears that the younger generations don't have the interest. But I think we're wrong about that. When I was young, I was a reenactor. Then as I got older, I joined a few societies, but I had to go out and make a living, raise my kids. Now that I am older, I'm more visible in terms of doing things like this. Brad Wyman behind me here has been a reenactor, and I'm one of the founders of the Potomac Highlands World War II Roundtable, and we have lots of World War II vets that had been in there and they're dying off, but we get a lot of young people coming to that meeting who are interested in that kind of history. They come up through the ranks that way, and they also have the added burden of paying things we didn't have to dream of paying for, TV and phone and all this and other stuff. What you said, though, is true. You have no choice. It's the law. You now have to take care of the building, and it isn't something you should do every 20 years. You should do it every year. Small maintenance, cyclical maintenance is going to keep your costs down, and to put a use into that building is going to keep your costs way down. If you can get a private developer out there, and they struggled with this same decision-making process you have to go through at the Footer building, they're the ones who are then responsible for it.
And I think that what the younger generation does have is an interest in repurposing. Do you know what I mean? It may not be the history that, catches them and gets them excited, but it's really the repurposing of a building is where we could probably use their, ideas, so.
Now, don't feel trapped by this building in terms of its history. I'm interested in the history, some of you may or may not be, but the fact that it is built with better materials, you can't get those materials anymore, and built with the idea of design like we don't design today anymore. All you have to do is the envelope of the building, and we can make changes to the building. I will help you do that with the Maryland Trust. I'll represent reasonable ideas and change by this group down to the Maryland Trust and help you with that side of it. That's why I'm on that board, is to represent Washington County and Hagerstown. I'm here free, folks, to help you. I don't do that for many people.
We appreciate that, too.
Yes.
I know
Thank you for your passion.
We've known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
So we're good at accepting the grant and figuring out a timeframe to stabilize the structure, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
Lou's a yes.
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 Yep,
I'd like to
Yeah.
see, I'd like to see us try to, since we don't have a definite need for possibly all the funds at once, I'd like to see us stretch it out as much as possible, utilize it over the 2-year period or whatever we can get away with until, I don't see any developers banging at the door wanting to get in there. So, we need to keep it alive as long as we can while we market it.
Council member, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but in order to attract developers, you have to do the upfront work. The more you put that off, you're not gonna get a developer. We did a lot of work, and we got almost all grant money to do it. There's a lot more pots of funds out there. We just had a hard-charging grant writer, and she found me money every time I needed it. We spent hundreds of thousands of dollars getting to the point where we could write and put out an RFP. Hundreds of thousands. She found it in dribs and drabs. 15,000 to get the wall planks down, 5,000 to shut down the cotton picking interstate ramp. It went on and on and on, but she found it, and it's all over the state in little pockets of money. You gotta have a good grant writer. But you have to do this work before you can get a good RFP out there.
Yeah, I don't have any interest in prolonging it. I think that, Doug has the expertise and sees potential, and, I think that it's not necessary to drag it out, honestly.
I don't disagree, and I understand the history of this building. I didn't get to see it, but I understand it's there, but when you're sitting here saying we have to spend probably a couple $100,000 to make it attractive to an investor, when we have a lot of other very serious issues in the city right now, some of which we're going to hear about tonight, it's hard to swallow making something potentially available for a investor to potentially come in and make money on when we have a lot of other things we have to fund right now. So it's a very difficult, and we have some very serious things that need funding. So it's-
I agree with you. We're gonna be looking under every stone there is a budget time,
Yeah.
so.
But you didn't hear what I just said. I'm not talking about you spending your money.
Right, we was talking about
Find
grant
some
funding.
pot of
Right.
money that it's out there. Dee Dee Richard was the one who did that, and she knew the state government, and she found the money.
Well, Delegate Quarterman,
Yep.
hi. We may need your help on this one.
All right, Rodney.
All right, have what I need, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thanks,
very
Doug.
much.
Oh, Doug, I went through that gatehouse many a times as a child.
Well, you might do it one more time.
I don't know if I'll live that long, but sure.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Doug. All right, Kathy, you're up.
Good evening. We're here today to introduce to you the annual package of updates to the Land Management Code. Rather than take issues as they come along one by one, which have all involved public hearings, et cetera, the planning staff and planning commission have adopted a policy of accumulating issues or ideas over the course of a year and then processing a single package once a year. And this is our 2019 packet. Just wanted to point out a couple of quick things to you. We have adopted a new report structure for these. There are 29 issues that are being brought to your attention. Each one of them is their own separate report. In the top left-hand corner is actually a report number, 2019-01 through 2019-29. And it's got a standard format that briefly describes the proposal, a summary, and its justification, and then below that box would be the actual proposal itself. Each one of these is also identical in format in that new text is in red, existing text to be removed is in strikeout. Wording that is in blue are just directions or comments from staff. They're not actually part of the actual wording itself. And then if it's in standard black font, that means it's existing text, which will be retained. Also want to point out that of the 29 items in the package, we look for ways to make our ordinances more property owner and developer friendly. As a result, the majority of these proposals are actually liberalizations of existing ordinance. The ordinance also identifying things that might be redundant or no longer appropriate, removing them. There are a couple of things in here where the regulations are being tightened, but for the majority of them, it is more making it user-friendly and loosening the regulations for the benefit of the community and the development community. Wanted to go over just a few of the primary or the biggest items. Some of these are very small, 1-2 sentence, or in some cases 1 or 2 word changes. But there are a few that are fairly substantial that we would like to point out to you. On the cover memo, I would like to point out that the numbering there does not correspond to the report number. Looking back on it, I should have done that a little bit differently, maybe just did bullet items. But I just want to point out that 1 through 23 on the cover of your memo does not correspond to the report numbers on the individual report, or individual reports. But I would just like to point out a few things. Item 9 on your cover memo, and I'll use the numbering on the cover memo, is increased maximum accessory structure sizes on large properties and residential districts. There are limitations on the sizes of sheds and accessory buildings in our residential districts. However, some much larger properties, this seems overly constricting. Therefore, there's proposals in there to allow for larger and even 2-story accessory buildings on properties over 20,000 square feet. This came from basically a property owner who was interested, had a large property in the northern part of the city, and would actually like to have more than 900 square feet accessory building. And this would make larger properties be able to do that. And that is report number 12. Item number 10 on your memo adds new permitted uses in the IMU and the CR zoning districts. This is a result of two things. One, the annexation on the other side of Antietam Creek a few months ago. Mr. Divulus, the representative for the property owner, asked that the city look into certain changes in the IMU zoning district that we assign that land to make it more compatible with the county zoning that they would be losing. We did meet with them, and there is in staff report number 13, a number of proposed changes that would make the IMU district have some additional uses that are more consistent with the county zoning that was in place there. However, there are a few that they did request that the Planning Commission thought were inappropriate. Also, in the CR district, we received comments from the owners of the Daub Farm. They're looking to move forward with development of that tract in the foreseeable future, and there was a number of items that they requested also be added to the CR zoning district. That is staff report number 14.
They were looking for consistency with the county's HI zone. And so we did not always, Planning Commission did not always agree with everything because the county's HI zone is very wide-ranging.
Yes. And in both of these, both in the IMU and CR, there are ones that we said, yes, okay, that makes sense. And then there are other ones, as Kathy mentioned, that Planning Commission thought were inappropriate to add.
They were more industrial in character.
Number 11 on your cover memo, revise the local conversion district requirements to address multiple existing dwellings in expired nonconformities. This is a result of a nonconforming building in the southern part of the city that has it's actually an expired nonconforming use, but it had more than 2 dwelling units in it, which made peculiar for the reuse of. So there's some proposed changes there that would liberalize that a bit. And that is report number 15.
That was the
That's
issue.
the issue, yeah, with
The former Bubba's.
Deli,
right,
Yeah.
okay. Is that now being allowed, or is that?
What it would do, it would be allow them to apply for the local conversion, have more than 2 dwelling units. In this case, it would be 3. What it does not do is it allows it just to be turned into a apartment building, because there's a commercial space and 3 apartments. And the purpose of the local conversion district is to allow commercial uses back into these commercial or mixed-use buildings. The Planning Commission thought it's not appropriate just allow them to turn into apartment buildings.
Okay,
So-
so that commercial space could either be used as it would have to be used as a commercial space?
That's correct. Amongst the uses that are permitted is on the list of permitted uses in the local conversion zoning district. So they will have options. They're not limited to one particular thing. But it wouldn't be an apartment.
And when we were receiving input on this, the desire was to be able to reactivate what had expired.
Right.
And what had expired was a
Was-
commercial space with 3 apartments.
Yeah,
And it was kind of a glitch, the way the ordinance was written. If you had existing and the non-conforming use had not expired, you could continue to use multiple dwelling units, but if it had expired, you were limited to 2. So it was kind of a, like I said, a glitch or a loophole essentially in the ordinance that we're kind of
was
closing.
that building in question, had it, at one point, had turned to a 4-unit apartment? Or, no, it had not, okay.
Did not.
Okay.
Moving on to number 17 on your memo is add mixed uses, commercial and residential buildings as permitted uses in the CG and CR districts with design standards. We received a number of inquiries, peculiarly at one time from several different property owners who had properties in the CG and CR districts about adding some residential to their properties. And the thought was that if appropriately designed, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. This would allow, right now, residential is not permitted in the CG or CR districts, but this would allow integrating some residential into mixed-use buildings. It won't allow you to build an apartment building behind a shopping center or something like that, but if you have come in and meet the design expectations, it would be a good place for some mixed-use development. It is capped. The property can't be more than a certain size because you get too large and it starts really becoming something that should be handled through a PUD overlay. So there is a maximum size on the property. I believe it's 10 acres, 10 or 15 acres. But above that, you would still be able to do it the way we're proposing some amendments, but you would have to go through a PUD process rather than just by right. This particular provision, it's actually by right. You just get a site plan approved by the Planning Commission. And for that number 17, that's staff report number 23. On your cover memo, number 19, revise the minimum floor area requirements for new dwelling units. This was adopted a few years ago, but we were finding that the square footages that were adopted by the city at the time were higher than what we're finding elsewhere, and it was created some difficulties in retrofitting existing buildings, which deal with existing masonry, support walls, firewalls, et cetera, to comply with the letter of the ordinance as far as minimum lot area or minimum unit area in retrofitting buildings. So the proposal is to reduce these square footages based on the number of bedrooms and whether or not it's a lived workspace. And that is on staff report number 25 in your package. Number 21 on your memo, comprehensive overhaul of the zoning ordinance regarding signs. This has been updated. We've removed the provisions dealing with temporary signs as was directed by this body. One thing that we did have to do, though, is we had to tweak the definition a little bit of the definition of a temporary sign, because if we're going to tell people this is not subject to the rules, we have to be able to describe it. Whenever you have a regulation like this, a lot of it's in that the details are in the definition. So there is a tweak to the definition a bit, and what it will do is it gets away from all of these people's personal signs, political signs, et cetera. But what it also does is it does protect from the proliferation of the use of temporary signs as essentially permanent signs. And we think we've found that right balance, and that's found in the definition section of that one, and that's staff report number 28. Comprehensive overhaul of the section regarding the PUD districts. We haven't had requests for a PUD in a very long time, and the feedback we've been getting from developers is that it's just written in such a way where it's just impossible to meet and have a project that works. So
It's also a lot of expense, design, engineering upfront before you even know if you'll get zoning approved.
So what we did is, the proposal here is to rewrite the PUD where it is more of a zoning approval, leaving the details of the design to the site plan and development process like any residential or any subdivision or site plan would. It allows the developer to come in with and propose their own bulk regulations, setbacks, height limitations, and also the zoning exhibit would be what's called a bubble plan. The idea is, for this body to approve the zoning should be, okay, these are where the general uses will be, rather than, sometimes we've gotten plans come in here that look closer to a finalized site plan, and then if they need to deviate from it later, they gotta come back through this process. So the new PUD process basically allows them maximum creativity in coming forward with a proposal, and of course, it puts them in a position knowing that it's a discretionary decision on this board whether or not this body to approve a PUD. It puts it on them to come in with their best possible proposal to essentially impress you into approving the PUD. And then it would move forward in the design stage like a normal subdivision there, or site development thereafter. And that is number 27, report number 27. And then the last one that we just point out to you is number 23 on your cover memo. Update the section on the zoning ordinance regarding wireless communication facilities for compliance with FCC regulations and also some other cleanup issues. That's report number 22 in your packet. The majority of that is associated with cleaning up. For example, we're creating the INST district, so there's a couple places where we needed to add some bulk requirements due to new districts being created. Also, we found that there are certain FCC requirements on response times for approvals. If you have any specific questions about that, Kathy is the one who did the primary research on that. I would defer to her to answer any questions on that.
When we first adopted the cell tower stuff in our ordinance, I don't know if it was in the 90s or around 2000, whatever, there's been a lot of FCC rulings that have come down over the years, and so this adds in those timeframes as well as the 5G small cell technology stuff. And then also, we looked at the City of Brunswick's code, which was adopted using a cell tower attorney as a consultant. And so much of the beginning where you see the requirements and standards for wireless, it's all in red. We were cherry picking out of Brunswick's ordinance that had that expert assisting them. And then throughout the document where you see the timeframes, that comes right out of the FCC rulings that have come over the years since 2000 or 98 or whenever it is we first adopted all this stuff.
One good thing that we found when researching this is looking at other examples that are out there. Our existing cell tower regulations, even though they have age on them, were very well written when initially written and are very concise and easy to understand. So initially, we were looking at basically throwing it out and starting over, and ultimately we concluded that really wasn't necessary. So what we're doing is tweaking what we have, because what we find ours is far more user-friendly than most jurisdictions, or many pages more than what we have here. And we're trying to keep things as simple and easy to understand for the development community and the citizen as possible.
So if anybody has anything that they want to particularly focus on, we can put it as an agenda item for next week to go over. We're running out of time with the public hearing and coming at 6 p.m. Anybody have anything right this very minute for Kathy or Steve? Thank you. And just get an email sent to Scott or Donna, and we'll put it on the agenda to be able to go over, okay?
Yeah, any heads up that you could give us if any of you have a specific issue about a specific one, so we can research it and be as prepared as possible would be helpful.
In the hearing, you can look forward to Steve providing you information on all 29, but tonight we were just hitting the
I
highlights.
look forward to that. Yeah.
Bring a sleeping bag.
But not a tent.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Joey, or Chief Keifer, you're up. Hagerstown Police Department update.
Good evening. Hi. So I was asked to come down and kind of bring an update to our crime issue here in Hagerstown, specifically to some recent shootings that we've had and some shots fired calls. So I brought some staff down with me in case there's any specific questions that you might have. I can bring them up to the table. I have our analyst here who put together a packet of information that you have of data that we're going to go over here tonight. I have Rob Marker, who's my MSEN coordinator that we got from Frederick, and he could talk to that program. I also have my command staff in the back of the room, my district commanders, that could speak to some other things as well. So what I wanted to do is just kind of give an overview of where we actually are, provide some facts, and then go over what we do, how we do some things, and what we're going to do and what we're planning on doing to address some of the issues. So just for an overview here, 2019, for any kind of weapons charges, discharges, or shootings that we've had, we responded to 136 calls for some kind of shots fired call. That sounds like a lot, and I'll go over that here in a little bit. 51 of those were confirmed. Now, of those 51, 2 of those were just someone calling or stopping by and dropping off some shell casings that they found on the street. We never actually got a call, so those are 2 of those that got categorized in there. 12 resulted in someone actually being struck with gunfire, and of those 12, 2 resulted in homicides. So through this year, or through 2019, we actually recovered 68 firearms, and that's not anything that had to do with a suicide or a domestic violence situation where we have to seize those weapons. These were truly seized off the street. We located them as a result of a crime or a shooting, or we've taken them off someone and made an arrest. So I will say that in 2019, and you'll see later in your packet, that was the highest number we've had in the last 5 years of seizing some weapons. So this is a little breakdown of how those incidents occurred, and what I will mention from this is that when looking at past years, that breakdown is pretty much the same. Those percentages break out like that. And just to give some reference to those percentages, we're still talking about, in this case, 51 incidents. 30% of that's going to be about 14 or 15 incidents of that. So it's not a huge number, although 51 still is 51 too many. So from 2018 to to 2019, we did see an increase of 65% of shooting incidents. And with that, in 2018, it was, over the last 5 years, that was an anomaly year for us. We only had 94 calls for service for shots fired. Generally, we are running around 127 is the mean average of shots fired calls that we respond to every year. And that's been that way for a while, but like the packet covers 5 years. So with that, it looks like there's a huge increase in those things. But we had 51 incidents this year of confirmed, and in 2018, even though the numbers were smaller, we had 31 confirmed incidents. 9 incidents involved gunshot victims to the 12 that we had this past year. So again, the numbers are pretty close in that sense. So to take a look at this chart, and it's in your packet as well, it looks dramatic on here because the numbers are small enough that it looks that way. If that number was drawn out over several years, you would see that flat line out a lot there. But what you're looking at here is the 2015 numbers are right around 120, and we are at 2019 for firearms incidents at 135, 136. So again, the mean average across there is around 127 to 130 per year that we respond to. So even though the chart on this one goes the opposite way in terms of the years, as you can see, firearms arrest that we've done this year being the highest in the last 5, and working along that trend is part of what's going on in society today in terms of people carrying guns, people using guns as a means to an end. And we're seeing that growing trend across the nation. So I wanted to bring a little bit of more information down to you in terms of firearms incidents. So these are broken down truly just 2 firearms incidents. And the thing that I wanted to show is that, yes, from 2010, you see the numbers are much lower than they are here in 2019, but the numbers started to creep up mostly in the aggravated assault area, right around that 2014-15 range. And we are actually lower in 2019 than 2018 in terms of those, in most of those categories, with the exception of possession, concealed weapon charges, and the aggravated assaults. So to confirm on the aggravated assaults, I wanted to mention that an aggravated assault doesn't mean someone shot at someone in relationship to what we're looking at this data. It could be that they had a handgun or had a pistol or had something that looked like a pistol, like a BB gun at the time, and they could have struck them with it, they could have pistol whipped them, as you may hear, or just pointed it at them or threatened them with it. So that's where the aggravated assaults come into play here. Doesn't necessarily say that they actually got shot at. So, and then to give some more brevity to what we're looking at, this is the overall uniform crime reports since 2010. And again, if you look at this in relationship just to the firearms side of things, the relationship is in almost every category we are down, and we are down even from 2017 in most of those categories. So the reason I point out these statistics is that, as I've said, and previous chiefs before me have said, we have been on an all-time low of crime rates for pushing 15 years or more. Across the nation is the same thing, but we've been at this low. And what we see is we see these ebbs and flows of types of crime. With what we've seen here in the last few months is an anomaly in a sense that we know where it's coming from, we know what's going on, and it has to do with our youth population and specifically our youth gang population. But we address that, and one of the things we do here is we do what's called MSIN, it's the Maryland Criminal Intelligence Network. It's a grant that we had applied for, and we were actually invited to be part of by the governor's office, and that's where Rob Marker comes into play. He's the coordinator for our program. And it's an information sharing as part of that, what we do across the whole state. So any gang information that is gathered, any incidents that we deal with, gets put into a federal database called HIDA, but it is shared across all the communities here in the state. And we try to connect up any gang activity that includes drug trafficking, human trafficking, and those issues, and obviously any firearms issues. We try to share the information across our community partners in the other counties to get to the bigger gang activity or the bigger connections so that we can take down networks of criminal activity. And these numbers that you see up here is 2018 year-to-date, some of the results of what we've been doing as part of our MSEN coordination. So what are we doing to respond to these shootings and shots fired calls? As we talked about the MSEN, and in this case, we have a case that we worked in 2019, starting in the October, November timeframe through December, where we worked with a variety of partners, including the Maryland Gang Unit, the Maryland Firearms Unit, ATF. We worked with MSP, the local sheriff's department, and we were able to utilize that program and put together those details to take down a growing group, and that resulted, and it's providing me some information here. So as of that, we yielded 4 handguns that we recovered, 5 arrests were made. We did 12 special operations utilizing grant funds to do overtime assignments with our agency people. We saturated areas that we knew were presented the issues that we were dealing with and the persons we were looking to deal with. We obtained great information and intelligence related to firearms and gang activity. So we did 21 traffic stops, wrote numerous citations, and we had 1 handgun recovered that was actually from a validated boss gang member, which was a big deal. Officers working the detail on December the 8th were able to identify a suspect from a suspect vehicle in a December 3rd shots fired event as a result of these activities. MSP gang unit placed charges against a subject that actually led to that individual cooperating with an investigation on a Dale Street incident we had. So he was initially uncooperative with our detectives until we were able to get these charges on him through the gang unit, and then he decided he wanted to cooperate and work on some things. So we got some beneficial gang intelligence out of that as well, and unfortunately we didn't get any charges out of that to date yet, but we're working still on that. We work on the corrections phone systems to monitor and persons of interest that we know that are involved in these shootings and shots fired calls and gang-related issues. We have meetings with our partners to work on prosecution strategies and increase our efforts to bring those activities to an end through either search warrants or charges. And those include communications with Cumberland, Frederick, Montgomery County, and the main ones we deal with, just within our MSEN coordination. We work very well with West Virginia and Pennsylvania as well. As a matter of fact, one of the things we did recently, an officer made a traffic stop on 2 individuals, had information gathered through these kind of activities, was provided out to them, knew who one of these persons were, that they were a person of interest in our investigations for these gang activity, was able to get a gun off that person out of that traffic stop. The other person in the car we were familiar with as well. Didn't have anything at that moment to charge him with, but the officer came back, worked through our internal intelligence functions, and came up with a plan. We knew he was on probation and parole here in Maryland. We reached out. Unfortunately, couldn't meet him here, but they had information that he was on parole in Pennsylvania, reached out to their counterpart, got him violated on parole and shipped back to Pennsylvania. So those are the activities that we do to get to those means to those ends. We're currently working with ATF on an investigation where we're actually looking at social media posts to collaborate on getting recovered stolen handguns that are coming into our community, which is quite prevalent here and elsewhere. So those are some of those that we talked about there. So current initiatives, again, working with the ATF, with the MSEN aspect of our investigative units. We're coordinating with MSP and PSP on an investigation currently. I don't want to go into any details on that. That's linked into several areas, not just here. We've created a watch center. What that is right now we're utilizing our light duty personnel our officers that are on light duty for injuries, and we've got them stationed in the building on the 3rd floor, and they are actually taking calls for service that can be handled by them over the phone, so that we're trying to reduce the calls for service on the street during peak hours by about 30%. And we've just started that about a month ago, and we're analyzing that, but we're having some success with that to free up our guys on the street to be proactive in the things that they want to do and to give us some freedom to do the things we need to do. So that's one thing we're actually working on, and that's hopefully going to come to some good results. We're utilizing the Project Exile initiative, which is a federal initiative. And essentially what that initiative is it focuses on felons and felons that have any kind of firearms issues. And we work with our federal partners on that, and they can't be juveniles, they have to be adults. But they will take those cases and look for federal prosecution. And if you're federally prosecuted under the Exile program, you don't do local time, you go to Colorado, which is, in the world of people going to prison, they want to go to prison close to home, close to where their family and friends are, so they can have visits. And they really hate going to federal prison because they get shipped across the country. So that's a program that we've been trying to work with and work through with our federal partners. As you already know, I created a district commander system for our command structure. That's allowing the commanders, 3 of which are back here in the back of the room, to isolate and look at planning on any issues that are going on within their geographic district. I can tell you that my Western and Eastern District commanders, we met yesterday, as we do every Monday, for an ops briefing. They have come up with a plan that we will go over again tomorrow and finalize. That is a short-term plan to address the recent shootings that we've had based on the intelligence information that we've got. I'm not at liberty to go into what that is, but rest assured that it'll be an aggressive approach to the information that we have. And they've come up with at least a preliminary plan that they've run by me, and we'll go over to finalization on that tomorrow. We'll continue to do designated special operations, utilizing our grant funding and even regular overtime if need be to address the issues. And as I said, we have Emily Tinsley in the back. She's our analyst. Her and Rob Marker work on intelligence gathering. They do our data collection so that we can put our staff into the areas that we need to put them in. One of the things that we hear a lot from the community and from people is that, why can't we stop these things? And I'm going to ask a question that's a rhetorical question, but when is the next traffic accident going to happen? And where's that accident going to happen at? It was a point that was pointed out to me by one of my detectives in this discussion, and he asked the question, when's the next bank robbery going to happen, and where? So, in a bank robbery, how do you keep a bank robbery from happening? You put a cop there, right? We have finite amount of banks here in the city. I still don't have that many cops to put a cop in a bank, in every bank, while they're open. So when it comes to any of these other kind of crimes, they're impossible to predict exactly where they're going to happen at and stop them. So we are always going to be in a reactionary mode and going after these criminals, and we go after them heavy and hard. And it's something that is a community issue, and it needs a community solution. We are on the front lines of that, and we will be more than happy to take the lead on anything, and we will go out and aggressively go after those that are doing evil. But we're not going to be able just to stop it. Chicago has the biggest murder capital in the world right now, and they have more cops than they can shake a stick at. It's an issue, it's a social issue. I'm not making excuses. I'm just trying to be real about what we can and can't do. So in years past, 20 years ago, the crime was isolated in some of these things in certain pockets of our community. And we've done a really good job of dispelling those evil doers, and they are now dispersed throughout our whole community, which makes things harder in a sense, but it's made it fair for those specific communities. So now we're dealing with that, where the other thing that's changed is the demographics of who we're dealing with. We have a much younger suspect that's carrying weapons, and they're more impulsive and when they use them. So we've had a whole lot more vehicles driving around shooting each other in vehicles that are moving vehicles that we never had before. Those are impossible for us to know that I got to put a cop somewhere to stop that. But what we have been finding more so than anything else is that no one tells us anything anymore, in any community.
Well, it's all over Facebook then.
Well, and the information on Facebook is most of the time not even real and not even true. In some recent shootings, we had places of residence that we found after the shooting happened and talking to the neighborhood that there was all kinds of activity going on there that never made it to the law enforcement. Those tips, those information never made it to us to give us any heads up that there was something going on. When we have these shootings, the one we just had up in the West End over the weekend, double-digit people there, and not a single person saw anything. So what that does for us is it causes us to identify the people that are involved in those cases, and in those cases, it's anywhere from 2 or 3 or 5 or in double digits. We now have to decide what activity they are involved in, do an investigation on that activity, and then it's the age-old thing, I want to get out of jail, so I'm going to help provide information to a bigger fish. And it takes months to get to those results anymore. Those quick fixes that we used to have years ago, within a day or two making an arrest on these things, is not the commonplace anymore. Now, we're making an arrest months later. Officer Morris came to me today and gave me an update on a case he's working that had to deal with firearms and some gang members. And that was back in September. He's just now applying for the charges, as he was telling me today. So that's the new norm. So what I'm trying to say to the public and to you is that we are still locking up people and making arrests and taking the evildoers off the street. It's just not happening at the very moment that it's happened, that the incident occurs. It takes us a little more time, and we got to jump through a whole lot more hoops. But I've got the best detectives in the world back in the building doing the work that they do, and I got the best police officers on the street doing the work that they do, and we're getting better at sharing information with each other. We're getting better at doing the job in that sense, but we've got to do better as a community about sharing information both ways. So I'm here to say again to the community and to you when you talk to anybody in the community, the See It, Say It, Send It app is one thing that they can do. If you're afraid of reporting your neighbor for activity that's going on, download the app and put it into our hands. It's anonymous, and those tips are valuable, because the more tips we get in, the more I can place my staff onto those things.
And where do those tips go?
All those tips, every time anyone sends a tip to the See It, Say It, Send It app, it comes into every single supervisor and command staff member. It comes to our phones. So you never have to worry about the person getting it's not working. Whoever's working at that time is responsible for looking at that data. And if it's kind of historical data, then it goes to our analysts, it goes to our NTF agents, it goes to our detectives, and they look at it to determine, hey, we've got something going on here, we need to make a plan. We know there's activity in this neighborhood, we know there's activity at this house, we know there's activity with this person. And it gives us some direction to utilize our staff. I'm not going to talk about being short-staffed, because that's not an excuse, and it's never an excuse. It doesn't matter if I'd be full-staffed. I still have to direct my staff to specific places, because just putting them out there randomly going around doesn't have any real impact. Everything we've done, everything you've seen here, was just a tip of what we do and what we can talk about, is done through intelligence and through that direction. So it's important. And that's what our community's changing to. This is just an example of some of the things that we provide to our staff, and it's just a hotspot. It's Emily taking all the data for a 2-week period and finding out where is our hot activity zones, so that we can try to push that there. And it doesn't mean that the area that's hot is where we're going to put our people, during that week, because we may have some other intelligence that moves us somewhere else. But this gives us information to direct our staff to look at. And this is just a component. We're looking at people, places, and activity. And when they all merge into one place, that's when we're going out and putting these details together, overtime assignments, and we're directing our patrol staff there. Our detectives are focusing on that. Our NTF agents are doing that. So, yes, it feels like our firearms-related incidents have grown. I'm here to say they have not. They have peaked. We had 4 incidents over the weekend. We had an unusual weekend, and it was not one that we all liked. But in all of these firearms-related incidents where someone's shooting at someone else, it's a known offender shooting at a known offender. These are not random cases. These are people living a lifestyle or involved in something that's causing them to shoot at someone else or be shot at. And there is a danger, and that danger is still one that I worry about and my staff worries about, is that stray bullet going somewhere and hitting somebody that's not any part of this. And that's a fear that I have. And my growing fear is that my guys are going to be involved in an officer-involved shooting, either shot at or they have to shoot someone. We just had an incident again last week, where one of my officers was on a noise complaint and a gentleman pulled a gun on him. And he didn't shoot the guy and was able to get the guy to drop the gun and make the arrest. But that's the nature of life today, and that's where my guys see it every day. But I feel for this community. I feel for the people in this community that are afraid. But I'm here to just give them some facts that it's not growing. The demographics has changed. The younger kids are carrying guns, and they're just more impetuous in what they do. They're not following the gang rules as we've learned through our older gang members. So we're addressing it. We're working very hard on addressing these firearms incidents. We take them very seriously. And I know we don't promote a lot of this out to our community. Again, double-edged sword. You promote it, you scare people. You don't promote it, and people think you're trying to hide something. It's a balancing act there. And sometimes we don't share because investigatively we need to keep it under our hat. It's better for us to know what we know and go after these bad guys in a way that we can get to them quicker. So just wanted to give everybody a little bit of an overview of where we are here, and I'll take any questions.
I have a couple comments
Sure.
and questions. So one, I think it's important for everyone watching and for the newspaper and for the comment section that is ever going on the internet that we recognize that there's crime in the city, because it never fails. Every article I see, there was one today with you saying this was unusual, and the comment section saying, well, all the administration says there's no problem. We recognize there's a crime problem, but we get to hear from you weekly and sometimes daily when we see you about all the initiatives going on. So it's not that we don't recognize we have a problem, but we trust in HPD that you guys are working on it. I don't like that you have to do this in public. I mean, I think it's important for our public to have faith in you that you're doing it, but I don't want the criminals to know what you're up to. You know, I want you guys to be able to be police officers and go after them. So I see it as a double-edged sword as well. And I know you didn't disclose, you know, personal information or things that you're really doing behind the scenes, but I just wish that our public would have faith that you guys are working very diligently. You recognize the issues and you are working on them. So that's kind of part one, but part two, you know, what can we do as a council? Is there something we can be doing more to support you? And what can our community do? I mean, obviously talk, the app, you know, provide information, but is there anything else that we can be doing or that the community can be doing to support you?
Honestly, it's the lack of information coming in that's making it difficult, and it's a lack of cooperation when we do get on these scenes to help us get there. I mean, I know people are afraid, and I get that. I really do. But if you want to step aside and say, you know, I don't want to be part of this, but here's the person that you need to look at, that gets us a direction. It gives us some place to start. And we've done that my whole career, where we have that information, and we find that, you know, the avenues of being able to get to that ability to charge and prosecute without having to use that person that's given us that information. But like I said, it's a community problem that needs community solutions. I know Councilman McIntyre and I are starting up a youth violence prevention initiative along with Addie Nardi from the Boys and Girls Club, and it's a model that was out of Santa Rosa that's been out there for 10 years, and it's proven. It's not the same model as theirs is going to be, but it's doing that prevention side. And, you know, that's the part that's not sexy. That's the part that doesn't look like it ever has any fruit to it, because how do you measure a negative? But if we're going to stop any of this moving forward in the future, it's got to be at that prevention side. So getting involved, getting people in the community involved with trying to come up with some solutions on that, and really working solutions. We're not in the talking stage about that anymore. I'm tired of talking and being at meetings to talk about a problem. You know, if I go to those, I'm going to walk out. It's about solutions, and we move forward. And this is one I'm excited about. And that's long term. You know, short term, we need information. We need people to help us with that. and we're gonna go out and be aggressive with it. We're gonna go out and, we're not gonna take it in this community that it's acceptable that people are shooting at people, or shooting at a house, or shooting at a car. We get used to it in terms of us wearing the badge. So don't take that as complacency. If you ever hear our guys talk about it, it's just something to get used to. But trust me, the one thing that we want to do, the one thing that you get some of the best satisfaction out of is when you make an arrest and there's a gun in that case. Guys get excited about that. When you do a search warrant and you're taking AR-15s out of a house that are dealing drugs and they're doing those things, because that is not going to hurt anybody. That gun's not going to cause any pain. So it's having that conversation and getting people comfortable again to cooperate with law enforcement. That's just becoming a big problem across the nation. No one wants to cooperate out of a sense of fear. And some of it's justified, some of it's not.
One of the things I keep hearing is, and we'll go back to the gunshots, people hearing gunshots. They report that, or they use see it, send it, or call. And but then the complaint is that there's never any feedback as to, okay, it really wasn't a gun, it was fireworks, or yes, there was somebody driving by shooting at something, or a gun battle or between known people. There's nothing in the paper the next day that says, here's what happened, and there's no information going back to the community like, yeah, you need to be scared and lock your door, or it was kids throwing fireworks out of the car.
And I don't have any easy answer for that one. Like I said, 136 calls last year, 51 confirmed. When I say 51 confirmed, we found shell casings or some evidence. And in some of those cases, doesn't say that the other numbers that we didn't find anything, that it wasn't an actual shots fired call. We had no evidence. There's nothing struck. There was no victim. There was nobody. There was no witnesses. It was the sound. So to determine whether that was someone shooting with a revolver, where there was no shell casings to be found, someone just shooting in the air because it's the 4th of July, or they're just shooting in the air because they just have a gun, they want to shoot it. So I don't know the real easy answer on that. When it comes to, obviously, anyone's getting shot or they're actually being shot, those are making the media. When it's just some found shell casings that we find on the ground or we find in an area, how real newsworthy is that? Because we don't know in most of those cases, did they just shoot around in the air because they were just messing around? Is that newsworthy? Is that rise to the level of scaring someone in a neighborhood, that there's an issue? Again, I'm open to some suggestions from you and from the community, but I don't know any real answer to that.
A good way to communicate that kind of thing back.
Each time there is a shooting that you verify, we get provided some form of information.
Not every, like I said, if it's just some shell casings found and there's no
Right, I'm
damage.
saying in an incident where you respond and there is some measurable occurrence. We see the press releases that you provide. A lot of folks either, don't subscribe or, we put it out, with the Herald Mail or some media outlet, but we don't, we don't put it out. And I used this example when I sent the email a couple of weeks ago. There's all these everybody has a neighborhood Facebook page that they probably belong to and you follow and I'm not any different than anyone else, but, and I use this example, and most of these pages are closed, neighborhood pages. And, our police aren't following the Facebook group. They're not following the Twitter group. They're not following, whatever social interconnectivity in that virtual format that you're using. You're just not doing that, right?
We are at some level, but not at the level you're talking about. We're not just monitoring.
Right. And,
Yeah.
but I think
We don't
that
have the-
there's
we
an
don't have the capability of
expectation
doing that.
from the public, and I have this conversation in other local jurisdictions, by the way, that I work with, not just here. I mean, it is a growing phenomenon that and I use the example, the other night that in one of the groups I belong with says, I heard this, these shots fired, and somebody says, yeah, I heard it over here, and another person says on another street block, yeah, I heard it over here, and, you know, the last person that responded said something to the effect, the police were here and at my house, and because they gave me the address, and I'm sitting there like, you know, like the guy in the Truman movie where he's clinging to the shower, like, okay, well, you know, what happened, you know, tell me what happened, but that's the last response on that thread. And 6 hours later, it's jumped to something else, and that's kind of forgotten and put by the wayside. I'm sure everybody out there gets, you know, these sort of messages if they belong to those groups, to those threads. You're not responding in that way. And the public shouldn't have an expectation that you're going to respond that way, ever. And that's not our obligation to do so. We put it out in a formal media framework in a very static nature that is the responsible manner in which to disseminate that information to the public on the approved channels, so to speak, that we as a body, you know, choose
So
to do.
for press releases, the rule of thumb really comes down to, is there a public safety issue that the public needs to know about? Is the media reporting, or is there issues in the social media world that false information is being reported out that's hurting the community in that sense, or we need the public's help? You know, and so those are the three real reasons why you put out a press release. I mean, you know, the job of the police department and the job of government is not to let everyone know everything that's going on all the time, because that's just information, and that's a news reporter and the media's responsibility to ask questions on some of those things if they can, but we don't have time. I can't put out a press release on everything that happens. What's important to you, in this case, is these firearms, might not be what's important to someone else. They may have something else.
What I'm saying is, that particular incident, like so many, may have never even gotten reported. And that's the other sort of side of that coin that I think the public, you know, as this phenomenon increases to use these social media networks, you know, to communicate those information, especially on a neighborhood-oriented basis, there is almost this expectation that you are following along.
Or that we
And
know.
that you're going to respond, and that you are in fact aware.
Yeah.
And it's very pointed to the last thing you said when we asked, what can we do? Because, you know, in another post in one of the neighborhood threads I got, says, you know, everybody be aware there's prowlers on the loose in the area. And I think that there's this expectation that you're probably sitting there behind some screen somewhere, and you just got a pop-up that there's prowlers in this particular neighborhood. Guess what, folks? The police don't know. And nobody's telling them, but you're having conversations about it. And so this last pointed thing where you say, we need to know, you know, public, you need to tell us, there is a huge disconnect happening right now, as that's a growing sort of interest of using those social media formats to communicate. But none of that's getting to you, because while, and I don't mean to be flippant about this, but while Mark Zuckerberg might know about it, you don't. And we need to transcend that in some manner to say, hey, you know, what's the framework we can get this information out of sort of what we're sharing on this very sort of informal, you know, platform, and make sure that the people that are supposed to be getting the information about it are getting it.
And that's the part that's baffling to me, because you're talking about everyone using this.
Yeah.
They won't.
And I've got an app that doesn't cost you anything to download, and it's like texting, and then you gotta do this exact same thing.
You don't do it.
And we get a lot of tips, we get a lot on it, and it's being utilized a lot. But at the level that we're talking about here, truly information that we wanna know, to know where these evildoers have moved to and are housing and doing their evil stuff, if the neighborhood people don't tell us, people believe that we know everything, and that we just magically know this information, and we don't. The only way we solve crimes is that the community helps us solve those crimes. They provide information, they're witnesses. And if we don't have them, we are not going to solve those crimes and get to those conclusions. You're a defense attorney, you know that as well as anybody.
Right. One of our problems, Chief, is we live in a nation, because I said it upstairs earlier, this isn't a city problem, it's a state problem, it's a national problem. And the national problem is a problem of fear. I think our elected officials and others have found that the best way to control society is through fear. Our citizens don't want to hear the truth. They never have. I've been up here many, many years, and if anybody thinks that suddenly we have a crime problem in Hagerstown, we don't suddenly have a crime problem in Hagerstown. It's always been the most dangerous place in the world. It's little Baltimore. I mean, my wife was telling me she asked if they'd been down to the library. They wouldn't go near the library. It's the most dangerous place in the world. There's actually homeless people that are around there. So do you think our citizens want to believe that, I'm going to leave motor vehicle thefts out, okay? Do you think we really have citizens who want to believe that in 1919, our homicide rate, our rape rate, our robbery rate, our aggravated assault rate, our burglary rate, and our theft rate were all less than 2018? You think anybody out there that's listening to this, first of all, A, wants to believe it, but more importantly, do you think any of them believe it? They don't. They'll say it's all a lie. It's government making up things. Do you think anybody really wants to believe that we have less robberies in 2019 than we did in 2010? That we had less burglaries in 2019 than we did in 2010? That we have almost half the thefts in 2019 than we did in 2010? So the reality is, you guys are doing a pretty damn good job.
And so is the community.
And the crime rates are going down. I mean, we had less than half the homicides in 2019 than we did in 2017. The problem is that people are scared. You talk about social media. You know, social media all day. I had kids riding down the street on a bicycle. Yeah, kids do that. They ride down the street on bicycles. But we're afraid of our own shadows in this country today. And we almost, I think, want to live in a police state. The answer is we want more police, and you're right, more police. Police force without the community has to be reactive. You can be proactive to the degree that we know what you do to be proactive. But the first thing we have to do is come to some realization that this is not a horribly crime-ridden community, any more than any other community, any more than reading about Frederick or reading about Martinsburg or reading about Chambersburg. And I also agree with you wholly, Chief, that most all of the gun incidents are people who know people. A lot of them are domestic. And also, I don't know if it pertains to the city as much as maybe the county and the state, but when I see concealed weapons charges, I happen to know what we all know. Since the liberalization in Virginia and West Virginia and Pennsylvania to concealed carry permits, we got a fair amount of people coming through this county that sort of forgot that their concealed carry permits don't carry over to Maryland, and get caught in traffic stops and get charged with concealed weapons, who are actually people who are not committing crimes. But everybody has a crime problem, because if you're the victim of a crime, it's a major problem. I guess in the 60-some years that I've lived in my house, I've had my cars broken into over the years maybe 20 times. Maybe not that many. But the last times I had my cars broken into and things, stereos stolen out of them, were in the 80s and 90s. So it's something that's going on, and while we're all here talking about the crime and the reports and the guns, I want to talk about what you have been able to do, which is reduce the crime in this community, not see it increase. And again, I reiterate that other than motor vehicle thefts, which, by the way, when I say that, 101 in 2018 and 108 in 2019, not to imply that it was a massive amount. Having said that, in 2017, there were 124, 113 in 2016, and 108 this year, and 113 in 2014. So we have a crime problem because any crime is a problem, but the police have done an excellent job in reducing it and continue to do so, and I commend you.
With my couple of ride-alongs that I've done, I would never be able to do what you do. I applaud, every officer. I think it's an amazing thing. One of the things that you said was that you have a problem with getting information. That seems to be a big obstacle for you. And the other thing that you said, and I know that we're working on, is a youth violence problem. And you and I have spoken about this offline, but I'd like to make a suggestion. And I know that the council really doesn't have much to do with what Washington County Public Schools offers, but the See It, Send It, Say It app, if that was able to be put on the iPads that every child in this county has, do you think that that would be something that would be helpful to be able to give these anonymous tips to you, because they see more and say more than, unfortunately, they don't trust you sometimes, but do you think that that would be helpful if they were able to have this app on their phone, on their iPads, that could maybe,
I don't think it could hurt.
right, I don't
Ye-
either.
Yes, it would definitely be, huge asset, because kids know a whole lot more than we give them credit for. And I'm talking about the kids that aren't involved in these things know a whole lot more than we give them credit for. I remember being a kid, and you don't want to snitch, and you don't want to be that kid, and kids are, backward in those things. But if you can be anonymous and you can be behind a screen, I think kids and even adults are more willing to
We see it
provide
all the
information. Provide that information. So yeah, I would love to
How
see that happen, and I can get with Dr. Michael and his staff and see how we can work on, it's free, it doesn't cost anything. And we really, the honest truth is that when we found the app was designed for that. It was designed to address the growing school shooting situation and get information from kids to help us with that. That was what it was originally purchased for. We saw other opportunities to use it throughout the whole community. So definitely, I know we've pushed it through our SROs to get the kids to put it on their phone. But again, I've been in community meetings and I've stood there and I've asked them to download and who has it and people that don't. And I watch people that are upset about things in our community and they still won't download it on their phone and provide that information if they have it. So, it's always gonna be a little bit of an uphill battle, but if we can just get more of our community to help us with information, and don't wait till the bad stuff really happens. If it's just, you got activity going on in your neighborhood, back to his thing with the prowlers, send us the information, send it through the app to us. We got an email, we got a report of concern. We got ways and avenues for you to send information anonymously. You don't have to call 911. You don't have to go through their process. People don't want to call 911 because you got to go through 40 questions to give information. I get that. So we've created these ways of getting information to us that you don't have to do that. In a couple of these cases, if we'd had some information, we might have been working on other things before it became a shooting. And that's really what happens with this. We know a lot of this is drug related, and if we know we got someone that's doing activity like that, we're gonna go after the drug side of that. And we probably or may have prevented a shooting or something bad happening because of that. When we do these search warrants, when we do these rips on these guys and these gals, that's where we're getting a lot of these guns. We're taking them off the street because we're catching them in a car. They got a gun on them. They've got drugs because we worked a drug case on them. But we don't get the information knowing activities going on in a residence. That residence is like anybody else's residence. At that point, we don't know. We're not getting calls for service there. We're not getting tips and information. So really getting that information to us is key. The more information, the better. It just works. I know my investigators, I know Sergeant Lewis in the back of the room would love people to give information on the cases that they're working, because they are working their tails off. And they're backtracking. Everything's a backtracking, to build what happened, and realize that they're spending an enormous amount of time to do that just to get back to the normal of having that information at the time that incident occurred. So, we're still gonna get some arrests. We're still gonna lock some people up, and we're still gonna take these bad guys off the street. It's just not real time like it used to be.
Any other questions for Joe?
Yeah, just one follow-up question. In terms of getting the bad guys off the street and the interplay with the courts, how long are they staying off the street? Are they staying off, or are they right back out?
It really depends on the crime. I can tell you that juveniles are this.
Juveniles, we have nothing.
Revolving door, back to the
Yeah, the
street?
juvenile side, but we are working on some things there. We've got we meet with the judiciary. I sat on a couple committee meetings that we talk about certain things. I do know that our local judiciary takes violent crime seriously. You know, in the past, we used to be able to do things with some minor crimes and get some heavier penalties. Those things have gone away with the Justice Reinvestment Act. We can't lock people up on certain things that now we used to. You gotta issue citations. It's made things a little different for us in terms of how we handle those things, but we change, we modify. You know, it's part of the nature of law enforcement. You just gotta figure out how to do something different than you did before, and you find out how to get around those things, so. But, yeah, you know, I know there's one case, and I'll stop, where it was reported in the paper that they were given probation for judgment on shooting at someone, and that was not the case, because I was upset about it and went to my investigators and said, what happened here? And it was a juvenile case that they kept in the adult side and gave pretty significant backup time, and it was probation, but that was the deal to keep him in the adult side. So if he violates, he goes to adult jail. Or if it had pushed it back to the juvenile side of things, he'd have got nothing out of it, and it wouldn't have been any leverage to hold over his head to not misbehave in this violent way. So. And he actually an excellent attorney. But it was a deal worked out between the prosecutor and everything, and it was the best deal for the community, and it was the best deal for what we needed to work on. So those things, when you read it, and I'm not blaming the media for misrepresenting it, I'm just saying it just didn't read the way that it really played out. And then it was
And it was also someone who was locked up for a rather substantial period prior to going to court, so.
So those things get lost in translation sometimes when you get the report out, but, so, yeah.
Thank you, Chief.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Jonathan, you're up. Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council update.
Good evening. We are here tonight to give you guys an update on the Youth Advisory Council. As you know, the council was sworn in August. It's comprised of 9 members and 4 alternates, as well as 5 community members. And tonight we have 2 of our members here. We have Lauren Asbury, who is the chairperson, and Zachary Brooks. They are both from North High. Lauren is a senior and Zach is a junior. I'm going to pass it off to Lauren to kind of update you on what they've been doing.
So hello, as she said, I'm the chair of the Hagerstown Youth Advisory Council. We've been meeting since October of 2019, and we've had 6 meetings since then, and we've got a lot done. So in the beginning, we kind of focused more on bylaws and structure and really getting ourselves off the ground and seeing what we wanted to get out of the council. And then we kind of turned into more so focusing on some key initiatives that we want to focus on in the future. And we decided on, as a group, through discussion, financial literacy, environmental issues, and wellness in a physical and mental sense. So for now, we've just been kind of making ourselves more aware, working with community partners, and understanding the full extent of these issues and ways that we can help and what is needed to be done. So we've met with Horizon Goodwill, Parks and Rec, HPD, Engineering, a multitude of different organizations and individuals to really make ourselves more aware of what we're capable of. And we just, essentially, as a council, what we want to do is we want to make Hagerstown better for everybody, the youth and anyone who wants to be involved in it. So we're doing everything that we can. So we're kind of moving a bit out of the planning stage and kind of moving in more towards action and actually taking hold of our initiatives and getting really specific with what we want to do. Yeah.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Oh, sure. Like Lauren was saying, we're starting to get more serious about planning things we actually want to do for the community in regards to our issues that we picked out together. And I think I speak for everyone on the Youth Advisory Council that we're very excited to start making change in the community for the youth.
Fabulous job you're doing.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. All gonna come together.
Any questions for the council? I mean, they've been meeting diligently for the last few months, and we greatly appreciate all their participation. So any questions from the mayor and city council to our youth council members at this time?
Not at this time.
All right, awesome. So we'll definitely keep in touch with you about what we're working towards, and we're really excited about this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. City Administrator.
Just
Short,
one-
please, short and sweet.
No, I got plenty of things tonight, Mayor. I'm kidding. Monday is a city holiday. All city offices will be closed in recognition of Martin Luther King Day. Trash collection, check the website, hagerstownmd.org. If you have trash collection on Monday, check the site and see if there's been any modification to that. Garbage pickup, that's all.
Okay. Shelley.
Just a reminder about the Washington County Recovers event tomorrow at the Washington County Library, 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. Anyone who is curious about recovery, we will be able to provide treatment.
Lou? Nothing. Boston? Nothing. Kristen?
I don't know if this is the appropriate moment or whether to wait for the presentation on the comp plan property zoning designation amendments, but I did send a follow-up email out regarding the proposal that we received last week on the income limited housing. I hope folks were able to at least leave that meeting and think a little bit about more what the entity proposed. I think the biggest thing for me that I left with, was this indication to this body that, this is what you're going to be known for, this is what you should settle for, this is what your community, is going to have. This is where the metro area is going to look to for this particular type of housing to place it. I mean, he couldn't have said it any more clearly than like, this is the best you can do, Hagerstown. And it came off, very difficult to accept and absorb. And I tried to point out, some of the things, and then to look this evening and see some of the amendment proposals of property as it applies to zoning of properties in different densities, and to hear some of the conversation already going on about that outside of this area, reminds me of those moments back in 2005 when we sort of fought, the good fight to get annexation for the extension of city services. And, one of the big pushes, or two big pushes of that, one was associated with the fact that this city, unlike Frederick and Gaithersburg and Rockville and all the others that are having some success in their fiscal stability, is that they are about 55% owner occupied and about 45% rental. And in this city, we're like 61% rental and like 39% owner occupied, where we are completely opposite of all of those other communities in striking that balance. I look at the fact that out of the 10,000 rentals that we have in this city, roughly about 5,400 of them are in some form of subsidization for, the rent for those units, for those places, which is disproportionately larger than so many of those other jurisdictions that the gentleman that presented sort of skipped over and said, you're going to be the place because, that's the place where it's going to be, and you need more of it. Going back to the annexation issue, if the impetus to win annexation was to grow the city boundaries so that we didn't have the Woodmere South and the Greenberry Hills and the Fountainheads and all of those owner-occupied neighborhoods building just outside of our city limits, around our perimeter, and constantly advertising, city amenities, no city taxes, and to watch that tax base grow while we struggle, what's the point of winning annexation to grow your tax base if what you're going to do is quickly, simply turn around and in that jurisdiction growth, support development that's actually going to be a greater burden on your tax base, not actually grow your tax base. None of that makes sense. Why annex then? You might as well just not annex and focus on the areas within your existing jurisdiction to build up.
And while I
It
agree
just
with
doesn't
you-
make sense.
While I agree with you, Kristen, I think you and I both know that no matter what we do, we're gonna probably not be able to stop that project, right?
Well, you know,
We can give our comment.
we can send a letter of opposition based on,
I agree.
you know, those
I concur.
merits that we have, the dynamics that we have, you know, and I also go back to this notion that is separate from the purpose of annexation and the purpose of growing homeownership in this city. One of the other things we talked about over the last decade was, and I think you see the Hagerstown Housing Authority that is sort of rightly doing that, is they've said, and they've kind of acknowledged over time, you know, warehousing individuals in specific pockets of socioeconomic living arrangements, so to speak,
Not
isn't
being-
good. It isn't healthy, it isn't productive, and it isn't stable for communities. You know, having them spread out and dispersed in and amongst one another in every different socioeconomic fashion is a better approach. And here we're going to say, no, we're going to continue the approach of federal tax credits for outside developers to warehouse individuals of specific economic means in a specific location of concentration. It's not healthy. It's not healthy for a community, and it's not something we should be doing. And I see the Housing Authority, when they're spreading it out, and, you know, they're spreading Nolan, and they're looking at different areas in the voucher system, Section 8, which, by the way, folks out there that, you know, have this incorrect belief that Section 8 is a housing type. It's not. It's not. So, you know, it's a voucher that an individual gets to go wherever they want in the market to provide that assistance to live within that particular area of the housing market. Those are the things we should be striving for that I think make a community more stable, not these the warehouse style housing developments that do nothing but perpetuate that sort of socioeconomic stigma in pockets of concentration throughout the community. It's just not healthy for us. So that's my 2 cents. That's my soapbox. I still think that if we wrote some type of letter of comment, I don't even care if you want to call it opposition, to say, look, you know, these are the reasons we don't believe this is healthy for our community. Much like, I know Delegate Quarterman left, much like his letter indicated, in a very sort of fact-oriented way, I think it does have an impact on the competitive tax credits that those entities shoot for. And at minimum, I think we should at least say, like we've done with the Housing Authority and other entities, hey, whether it's the Hope Six or whether it's, you know, McCleary Hill or whatever, you know, we want some mixture. We want some mixture. You know, Weston wasn't redeveloped in some type of singular concentrated, you know, package. It had some mixture. It took a long sort of process of negotiation, of deliberation to get that. This doesn't have that. And there is no interest from that presentation that I saw last week, other than to get the credits, get out, provide the minimum management standard as possible, and reap the benefits of that credit for the next 30 years at this community's expense without having to be directly negatively impacted by it. I don't understand how that's good for our community.
The 45-day comment period is up on the 25th of January.
Okay.
I would be okay with sending that letter too.
I am too. I
Especially
think we
after
are.
looking at
Well,
the income
yeah.
requirements.
That's for-
My gut instinct was we need affordable housing, but looking at their income requirements to what
That
it
didn't
is,
look like
it's not.
affordable to me.
It's not.
No, it didn't.
You have
That's
the
why I kept saying,
majority.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agree.
I don't have anything.
Okay, I don't either, so we're gonna take about a 15-minute break to allow us to reset the room, and
Yes.
we'll come back for the public hearing.
Oh.
I need to get a motion to go to 90th special session.
So moved.
Moved by Emily, second by Austin. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 4-0. First is a public hearing on the annexation of I-81 CSX Halfway Boulevard right-of-ways. Megan is gonna, okay, Kathy? You're up.
Good evening. The first hearing is on the annexation that's proposed for I-81 CSX and Halfway Boulevard right-of-ways. It's case number A 2019-01. As you can see on the map, it's in the vicinity of the I-81 Halfway Boulevard interchange. The subject properties are contiguous to the corporate boundaries and extend further to the south. Properties are within the city's growth area and better position the city to bring into the corporate boundaries development occurring on city water in this area. According to the Maryland Department of Assessments and Taxation, they do not assess the right-of-ways for the railroad or for roadways, so this is unassessed land, so there's no taxpayers to seek out a permission. Since these areas, they contain no buildings, no residents, or have no future development potential, therefore they are not served by city water or wastewater. The total acreage is 95.64 acres, currently zoned in the county. Even though we don't use this land for residential, commercial, mapping conventions means the zoning goes all the way across the city and the county. And so it'll cross over roadways, and typically it goes to the middle of the roadway and it has the zoning of what's on either side. So currently it's zoned highway interchange, planned business, business general, industrial general, and residential urban, because there's a variety of zoning districts in this area. The proposed city zoning, to be comparable to what it is currently zoned in the county, would be commercial regional, commercial general, industrial general, and medium density residential. There actually is, and I didn't even realize it, there's some residential over in this area, some existing residential. I think it's not commercial, but it's some residential down here. Following the introduction of the annexation resolution, the adopted annexation plan were sent to the state and the county for 30-day review and comment. We received general feedback from the county, no concern about this particular annexation, just expressing the desire that in the future, if we annex any more county right-of-way, they would like us to take it over. We've also received standard comments from the state. At this time, I would like to enter into the record the certificate of advertisement for this hearing, as well as the file by reference. And then the annexation resolution was adopted or introduced on November 26th, and the annexation plan was adopted that same night. The public hearing is tonight. And the approval of the resolution, if the council is ready to move forward, it would be on January 28th. And if it was adopted at that regular meeting, the annexation would become effective 45 days later, which would be in mid-March. And that is the extent of the staff presentation.
Any opposition or anyone in favor who wants to speak now on the annexation, please step up to the podium, give us your name and address.
Always love to break the ice. Jason Divalbis, 11125 Bemis Durford Road, Greencastle, Pennsylvania. Here this evening on behalf of many property owners out in the Hopewell Valley area. As Kathy explained, it's about a 95-acre annexation with nothing in it. No buildings, no residences, also has no future development. Thus, it has no current or future tax base. It's pretty clear that the only justification for the annexation is to extend out into the Hopewell Valley area and to make more properties out there contiguous or potentially contiguous to the city boundary, and thus making them prone to the city's annexation policy and future annexation. Needless to say, that is not an expectation of many property owners out in Hopewell Valley. They are concerned about what the future impact to their properties could be from the annexation. So on behalf of those property owners, they would hereby object to the proposed annexation. At least one legal basis comes to mind, which I would proffer to you this evening, and that is that the proposed annexation is not consistent with the statutory requirement that the area to be annexed be contiguous and adjoining to the existing boundaries of the municipality. as described in an Attorney General opinion in 1997, in addition to meeting the technical requirement that the annexation area actually physically touch, which this one does, the area if annexed has to also be in a unified sense with the corporate boundary. In other words, it can't just stick out and be an anomalous piece of property, and we believe that's exactly what this is. And on that basis, as well as the one described earlier, the potential impact of those properties, we'd be opposed to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any questions for Mayor and Council? Yes, Doug.
I just want to applaud the staff and the leadership of the city for taking this move. I think it's going to be a very positive thing for the city going forward, and 20 years down the road, we'll be very pleased with the results. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any questions from council members for Kathy? Seeing none, we'll close this portion of the public hearing and keep the record open for 10 days for any written comment. All right, moving on to the next public hearing is comprehensive plan amendments. Kathy's going to give a brief overview and maybe answer some questions that may come from the audience at this point in her presentation. So, go ahead.
First, I'll start by explaining what we're doing. The Planning Commission began the comprehensive rezoning earlier this year to implement the 2018 comprehensive plan, which is Vision Hagerstown 2035. As a part of that process, gaining public input, we were receiving requests for changes that were not reflected in the comp plan. So we put a stop to the comprehensive rezoning process to make amendments to the comprehensive plan to be sure that there was consistency, because state law says that comprehensive rezonings are supposed to be implementing what's in your comp plan. So that's what we're doing. It's not a rezoning at this point. It's making modifications to the comprehensive plan's future land use map to be consistent with what is proposed for future comprehensive rezoning. So, there we go. I just basically said that, all right? In order to create changes to the city's comprehensive plan, staff are required to send the amendment package to the state clearinghouse for a 60-day review period. City staff also sent the amendments to Washington County and the town of Funkstown, and the package was sent out towards the end of August, and the Planning Commission held their public review meeting on October 30th. Received feedback from the Maryland Department of Planning and MDAT, as well as input from the public. Future land use dictates zoning in the city, as I mentioned earlier, but what gets a little confusing, and we experienced this in the Planning Commission's public hearing, is that some of the general land use categories in the comp plan are exactly the same as specific zoning districts, so people really weren't understanding what was going on. For example, the commercial general future land use category in the comprehensive plan could either be rezoned commercial local, commercial general, commercial regional. It's a broad category. So in some cases, this was occurring with the proposal for the Dowd Farm. People couldn't understand what was going on, but it's the future land use that we're talking about now, not zoning. This is what happens to the plan, then future would be zoning issues. So that's one thing to be aware of, a little bit of confusion of the terminology between the land use categories and the actual zoning districts. The comprehensive rezoning is initiated in order to implement the comprehensive plan to ensure the city's zoning map matches the future land use map. And as I was saying earlier, because some of the changes proposed in the Planning Commission's comprehensive rezoning did not match the future land use map recommendations, we paused the comprehensive planning. So the Planning Commission finished their work, but before we sent it on to the Mayor and Council, we shelved the comprehensive rezoning to do this process, to make changes to the future land use map so that there's consistency between the two documents as required by state law. The comp plan amendments do not change the zoning, but recommend what future zoning should be. Future zoning changes would be made through the comprehensive rezoning that would happen after the comprehensive plan map amendment, or the comprehensive plan amendment process concludes. So this is an overall map of the city showing the areas that are recommended for changes on the future land use map. Just to go through it quickly, and then we can show you the maps. The YMCA property, it's not where the Y is itself, but it's land that was donated to them at the corner of Potomac Avenue and Northern Eastern, depending on which way you're going. It's currently recommended as future land use of business employment. The change proposed is to go to commercial general land category. And then the Linwood property, the southern half, this is recommended to go from medium density residential to industrial. The Dalb Farm property, the east side of it is currently recommended for business employment. This is recommending to have it go to commercial general to be like the rest of the farm. The South End Shopping Center, there's a parking lot that extends south of the buildings in the South End Shopping Center, and they're looking to subdivide that off and sell it to the industrial neighbor to the behind them. So the recommendation is for that part of their shopping center parking lot to go from commercial general to industrial. The Heb Road property, this is, I think a lot of the people in the audience that are here on this one, this is recommending that the plan language say it should go from medium density residential to high density residential. And that is because the plan was recommending a change. However, the existing zoning of that farm is high density residential and has been since 1978, which I think Megan has been sharing with folks who call. The plan was recommending that it go down to medium density residential, but during the public hearing process with the Planning Commission, the owner's representative came forward and said, you know, when we annexed this property into the city in 1978, we requested this zoning, we were given this zoning, and we have investment-backed expectations to use that zoning. So the Planning Commission said, that's fair. And so they are recommending that it not be rezoned to medium-density residential in the comprehensive rezoning. And so the plan needs to change so that the plan is showing it's exactly what it currently is zoned. But you're going to be hearing more about that later from folks in the audience. Copy Quick and Old Potomac Liquor, that's up the Potomac Avenue Railroad area. The plan was recommending that it go from commercial general to mixed use. We heard in the public hearing process that some of the folks who own two of the buildings up there would rather they stayed commercial general, so the plan needs to change so that it will stay zoned commercial general in the comprehensive rezoning. And then the Hagerstown Water Department is recommending their facility down there, Memorial Boulevard, go from industrial to our new institutional zone. That was the only one that was not showing up on the map on the comp plan as institutional. So here are the maps. This is the YMCA property that's not where their building is, but land that they were given. That's over by Stonehouse Square and Longmeadow Shopping Center. The purple is the business employment. It's recommending that it go commercial general to be commercial like everything else on that side of the street. In the comprehensive rezoning, now, to be aware, it's not recommending it get commercial general zoning, but the lower intensity local commercial zoning. But again, that's not part of this. This is just the land use category of commercial general. And then the Linwood property, this was a property that was proposed for townhouse development during the boom. It came in too late in the boom, so it collapsed. It was purchased by the housing authority. They were going to do something there, and so that's why the comprehensive plan was showing that it should be stay residential, but then they sold it off, and so now the plan is, part of the plan is recommending the north half go to industrial so you could continue the business park over there. And what we're doing here is recommending that the whole thing go because the Hagerstown Housing Authority doesn't want that lower part anymore. They've sold the whole thing off. And so this is recommending that it all go to industrial so that then it could be attached to the Sherman Industrial Park up there. And the Dalb Farm property, this is over at 40 and the exit off of 70. It annexed into the city about 10 years ago with zoning that is similar to these categories in the comprehensive plan. The recommendation is to do away with that business employment on the far east side and just have the whole thing be zoned the same, commercial general, which in this case would be the commercial regional zone, but the category for future land use is commercial general. That was a cause for some confusion in the Planning Commission hearing. The South End Shopping Center, again, they want to sell off a part of the parking lot that they never use. In fact, it's already being used by the people that they want to sell it to, and they are an industrial user, so this would is recommending that that parking lot that's below the buildings be rezoned to industrial from commercial general. And then the Heb Road property, this is that farm that's kind of Heb, Emmert, Beaver Creek. That's, as I said, been in the city since 1978 with a high-intensity zoning for residential. What came in as R3, it's now RH zoned, which is our current category for the same thing. The comprehensive plan is recommending it go down to medium-density residential, but as I said in the Planning Commission public hearing, we received some input, and the planning commission decided maybe it should stay what it is now, which is the high-density residential. So this would be changing the land use category in the plan to match the existing zoning. And then the Copy Quick and Potomac Liquor, that whole area up there now is currently zoned commercial general. The recommendation of the comp plan was to turn it more towards a sort of a mixed use of residential commercial, because most of the properties up there are currently residential and are non-conforming with commercial zoning. And so we had meetings with property owners out there, but during the planning commission hearing, we heard from Copy Quick, and the Copy Quick man was actually speaking for the old Potomac Liquor building, saying we would prefer those stay commercial general, and they are not at all residential in character. The old service station is still commercial general, so it just made sense to let that all still remain, because they're not at all residential. And then the Hagerstown Water Department offices down on Memorial Boulevard, that would be recommended to go from industrial to institutional, because that's a new zoning category that we've created that would be implemented in the comprehensive rezoning that would overlay on schools, hospitals, parks, things like that, and municipal kind of government buildings. And all the rest of those types of properties are already identified that way in the future land use map. This was the one that got left out. And then the last thing that we're doing is in the text of the comprehensive plan where it talks about land use types, it talks about institutional uses, and currently the plan says any zone would be appropriate for parks and so forth. But since we've created this institutional zone, it's recommending that for the institutional uses in the parks, recs, and open space, that the compatible zoning be institutional rather than any. And so if the public record remains open for 10 days until January 25th, that would allow us to receive additional input if folks who are here have other thoughts they want to send in, or people who couldn't make it tonight have things they want to send in, give them a chance. We're also on the agenda next week to review anything that the council hears tonight, and then if the council is ready, it could be approved, the comprehensive plan amendments could be approved as soon as January 28th. If they're not ready, it could take longer. Comprehensive plan amendments are adopted by resolution. And at this point, I'd like to, yeah, that's right, I did it with the other one. Enter into the record the certificate of advertisement for this hearing and the file by reference. And also, I handed out to you a public input letter we received today from someone from Heb Road, Cynthia. I jotted it down, of course, I'm not looking. Anyway, I passed the letter out. They got it by email, and I also printed it out and copied it. And so the council does have that letter. That's a letter in opposition to the Heb Road change. I think that's all I've got. Yes, that's all I have.
Okay. Now we'll take any comments for or against this proposed change. I have only have one person who signed up for this portion, but I think some folks might have got confused, so I'll just ask Jim Castillo. You signed up under the annexation one, so it's okay.
Oh, I didn't mean to.
That's okay, yeah, that's what I kind of figured, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to sign up on Dowd Road.
I got you.
And I would like to respond to
Sure.
objections after they've happened so that I can address it directly.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Tom, there you go. I couldn't read your name, so if you want to testify, please step up. Name and address, please.
I'm here on behalf of my daughter, who resides on Hem Road. She's out of town and couldn't make it. Basically, I guess she sent a letter to you.
Yes.
And I think the gist of it is, basically, it's an area of the city that's more or less rural, unusual for a town. And when she moved there, as far as she understands, she understands that eventually it's going to be developed. That's a given. But
she understands they want to develop at high density. Now, that's a complete change of what they have there, complete change from the neighborhood and from the previous zoning, as far as she understands. So she just, it's going to completely change as people move in. We understand, I mean, people have to live someplace, but you don't need high density there in that section of town, and that's her objection. That she enjoys being a rural area. The roads are not adequate. They're going to have to do more than, they're going to have to develop the roads. The roads are dangerous. They're basically county roads, small county roads. And if you put high density in there, you're going to have to widen the roads. You're going to have better police protection, which is, it's a section of the city that really is semi-attached to the city. How are you going to get police protection out there on a routine basis? You're not. She and her neighbors feel that they moved in under the impression that, yeah, it's not going to stay rural, but it doesn't have to be developed so it's the middle, high density like the town. That's basically what she has to say. You have it in the letter too.
Yes, we do, yes.
Thank you.
Kathy, when was this property annexed into the city?
1978,
And what was the zoning given to it then?
R3, which is what we now call RH, which was an apartment kind of zone.
Just high density.
So the one question, Kathy, I think we all need to understand is this is not a zoning change. It was, originally you were going to change the zoning. It is already high density zoned, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And originally the comprehensive plan said change it to medium density.
Right.
But so if everybody understands, if you do nothing at all, it's high density housing.
Right.
For it not to be allowed to be high density, we actually have to change it. And it's been high density zone since 1978.
42 years, right.
And I would just say this for what it's worth. The owner may have said in 1978 he bought it under that theory, but I gotta tell you, 40 years later, things have changed. So I don't see that as a real adequate reason not to take it into.
It was the same owner when it annexed, so they brought it to us and asked for that zoning. And then we annexed it with that zoning.
In 1970 something.
78.
Yeah, well, if I'm gonna be limited to what people anticipated in 1978, I think our world has serious difficulties. But I just wanted people to understand, we're not changing this to high-density zoning. It is high-density zoning. Okay.
All right, next, Lisa Seifert, who says that you don't want to testify, but if you do, please step up to the mic. Okay.
I just want to say I'm a resident of Emmett Road, and this property that is in question on Heb Road actually fronts a good bit of Emmett Road and Heb Road. First off, when the zoning notice went up, it was set back from the road on Heb Road. There was nothing else in any of the other road frontages. And I talked with Megan about that, and I was told that whoever put the sign up, if they wanted to put it in the middle of the 31 acres, they could. It was up to us to know about the zoning notice, which in my opinion, I think that's wrong. We should have a voice. And if we could go back to medium density, that would make me happy. I live on Emmett Road. I've been there a long time. And if any of you would decide to go out to Heb and Emmett Road between 6 and 8 in the morning and try to get out on the dual highway, or go there between 4 and 6 in the evening, you're taking your life in your own hand. And if we add high-density housing here, we need to look at traffic. We really need to look at traffic. And right now, as this gentleman said, trying to get police protection there. When I moved there 28 years ago, we had state police. They responded. Now, I'm in county, I have sheriff's deputies, it takes a long time for them to show up. They come after the fact. The property in question would be city police. So we have 3 different police services, and we don't get coverage. So I'd like you to take all of this into consideration.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Dival-Bliss, you're signed up to testify.
Thank you. Jason Dival-Bliss again, 11125 Bemis Durford Road in Greencastle, PA. I'm actually here on behalf of the contract purchaser of what was referenced as the South End Shopping Center property, as well as the current owner of the aforementioned Heb Road property. And both of those parties are in support of the proposed comprehensive plan amendments pending before you, or being discussed before you this evening. I'm going to go ahead and reiterate what's been stated because I actually have an exhibit to go with the statement. But you know, the property is currently zoned for high-density residential development and has been zoned that way since 1978. I actually have the zoning map. If nobody wants to take the city or my word for it, it's from 1979, but it specifically identifies the May 1978 annexation of actually a number of properties to the corporate. Well, it was a bunch of properties that were annexed into the city in 1978 to extend the corporate limits out in this direction down 40, and at that time they were assigned the zoning classifications. So this map shows the R3 zoning designation as of 1979. It identifies the annexation by which it happened, and I also just have, for illustration purposes, the 1972 map, which I found very interesting, that shows nothing within the city this far out 40. So strategically, that's how this all evolved. I think, as demonstrated by the comments already received this evening, you know, confusion has set in because the comprehensive plan was actually changed a few years ago in a manner that was inconsistent with the current zoning. So the subject amendment here to change it back to is to keep it consistent with the zoning, and I can understand why that's confusing, believe it or not. With regard to fears about development, there's been a lot of rumors circulating about what's happening and what's going to happen. Well, right now I can tell you that the property owner has no plans to develop this property. There's no contract to sell this property. Right now the property is sitting there and there is nothing pending that will change. It's been 40 years since this property received this zoning and been annexed into the city. So there are challenges to the development of this property, and they are not going to change overnight. As much as, quite frankly, the owner may want them to, they're not. And some of the neighbors have identified those roads. We didn't even mention water and sewer. These are all real issues that will likely, you know, impede the future development of this property unless they can be solved. The owner of the property understands those challenges. He's done many developments before. We know that before this property can develop, those issues have to be dealt with, but they are not the basis upon which the 40-year-old zoning classification should be put into jeopardy by a comprehensive plan that is inconsistent with it. One of the reasons, I will say, in all honesty, one of the reasons that we objected to the change of the comprehensive plan a few years ago was that just recently, within the last 3 or 4 years, there actually has been interest in this property. The macroeconomics have changed and there has been interest. That interest from speculative buyers and developers may be the reason why people now perceive that this is happening. But again, I want to reiterate, there are no plans. The property is not under contract. There is nothing imminent as we sit here this evening. This is simply to change the comprehensive plan to preserve a 40-year-old zoning designation.
And this wouldn't have happened had the city not want to take the steps that we need to do to, for our comprehensive plan update and things like that. It just would have sat there the way it was.
Correct.
Anybody else wish to testify in favor or against? Yes, sir. Step up to the podium, please. Give us your name and address.
Mark Bishop. I live on Heb Road, actually directly down from this property that's being talked about. And I understand that this was originally zoned in 1974, 78, whatever it may be, as high density. And as you pointed out, things have changed in that time up to now. There has already been a plan that Funkstown has put in that they've annexed part of back on Beaver Creek and Emmett Road to put in a development back there. Excuse me. So again, I reiterate what a lot of these people, my neighbors feel, the water, where is this water going to go? If you come down Heb Road, as soon as there's a hard rain, immediately the county comes out, Funkstown probably, there's flooding in this road. The road is narrow. People, again, they do speed. It is a country road. And our concern is if they have no plans in building this anytime soon, there's always a possibility. Tomorrow someone could come in and offer a boatload of money and they're going to do it. But at least look at what has already been planned and is going to happen in that area. And let's look at this again and let's keep the high density out of this area. The area is not going to accept this as far as roads, water. I understand that we're fed out of Funkstown from the water. The water is purchased from Hagerstown. Is that going to be on city water also? What's that going to do to our rates? Everybody's going to have to chip in to get water up to these areas. So high density, I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, it applies that apartments can go in, correct? Where medium density doesn't. How many apartments how many apartments would be in this complex, along with townhouses, the single-family homes? I just think the area cannot handle it, the traffic cannot handle it, and things like you said, sir, times have changed. I don't think anybody thought in 74 and 78 that Hagerstown was going to be the town that it is today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Kathy, you want to close this out? Any questions for Kathy from the council? Okay, we'll leave it open for 10 days for public input, for written input, and seeing no further action, yes.
And it's on the agenda for next week to be able to have a conversation about what you heard tonight.
We should have a conversation, yes, that's great. Okay, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.